25. Yep. 534.
We all know in the event of an emergency to call 911, and within minutes, police or EMS squads arrive to perform life-saving measures. Before I became a volunteer EMT, all that I knew about EMS came straight from what I saw in the movies.
Get the hell out of my way.
Okay, what happened?
Please tell me he's gonna be all right.
No, he dead.
Fucking, we just signed our first record deal.
Look, he dead, son. Ain't nothing we can do about it. Come on, Frank, that's him.
What do you mean he's dead?
He's not dead. It's a heroin overdose. Let's break out the Narcan.
He's dead unless you folks want to stop bullshitting me and tell it straight. Then the good Lord willing will try and bring him back.
Since getting my certification, I've continuously learned more about the field and its history. I've met countless people through it, both fellow EMTs and paramedics, and of course, the patients. I now volunteer as an EMT at Narberth Ambulance. Narberth Ambulance covers 5 townships in the suburbs of Philly: Lower Merion, Narberth, Haverford, Conshohocken, and West Conshohocken. Narberth Ambulance has both volunteer and career emergency personnel who provide their services. So what actually happens and who comes when you call for an ambulance?
So simply put, there are 2 kinds of ambulances. There are ALS ambulances for advanced life support, and there are BLS ambulances for basic life support. And they are scattered in different configurations throughout the state. Narberth puts the top people. We can put ALS trucks in all of our responses, and our goal is to basically have the highest trained person at your front door. When the ambulance shows up, the care starts immediately. We don't just pick you up and take you to the hospital to get fixed. That's 1970s, 1980s concepts. We start the care right as we enter your doorway. And so we bring the first 10 to 15 minutes of the ER to your door.
But it hasn't always been like this, has it? From a quick Google search, I found in November 1967, the FCC met with the American Telephone and Telegraph Company, aka AT&T, to find a means of establishing a universal emergency number. It was then announced that AT&T would establish the digits 911 as the emergency code throughout the United States. It was simple, easy to remember, and dialed easily on rotary phones. But what about paramedics? Al Davey, paramedic and executive director of Narberth Ambulance, has said this before.
If you've seen one EMS organization, you've seen exactly that many. One. What we do as a 501c3 nonprofit that provides exclusive 911 coverage to all of our Lower Merion, Narberth, Conshohocken, West Conshohocken, and Haverford. We are our own independent company with our own elected board. Boom. You go just to Upper Merion, municipal-based, run by a fire chief, but ultimately responsible to the township, and that township runs that system. You go to Radnor, and it's the firemen can hop on the ambulance and off the ambulance and get on the fire truck. Everywhere you go, EMS is built differently. In Jersey, most police departments run the ambulance. Now you go to Philly, and it is one system, fire and EMS. You go to New York, every hospital has their own couple ambulances, and then FDNY partners to do to pick up everything else.
With so much discrepancy within modern EMS across the U.S., one must wonder how EMS got its start. Before the 1970s, emergency care was mostly in the hands of police officers, who often lacked the medical training and life support equipment.
Back in the 60s, when you called the ambulance, the police came.
Policemen were in charge of taking people to the hospital.
And they would put the person on that little stretcher and throw them in the back of the paddywagon, slam the door, and go as fast as they can. People were dying from this.
In Pittsburgh, some police emergency vehicles refused to go to poor, predominantly black areas.
At that time, black people couldn't get an ambulance. You couldn't get an ambulance into a lot of communities. We're last on the list to get service.
It was there that the precursor of modern EMT service was born, the Freedom House Ambulance Service. It was an all-black team of paramedics, the first of its kind in many ways.
I don't think that they really thought that was going to ever work. I mean, we're talking about 25 black men. That's how it started. It was 25 of us.
In order to achieve change, and this is what we're after, there has to be conflict.
There were no standardized public emergency services in America. And yet, with the help of Dr. Peter Saffer, father of CPR, and Dr. Nancy Caroline, a neglected community was getting their chance for survival in a medical emergency.
We are aiming for a training program for ambulance attendants under the direct supervision of physicians.
Freedom House was a program to hire the unemployable, some of the alcoholic and drug abuse people that they wanted to get off the streets.
The Hill District is the #1 poverty area in the city with the largest number of underprivileged.
I remember the title said, ambulance driver. So I said to myself, an ambulance driver? What is this, am I going to be a chauffeur for sick people?
And we went to school and we went through training and we did an excellent job.
We were starting IVs in the field, doing tracheal intubation in the field.
We were the ones who changed all emergency medical services. We became the standard.
The crews at Freedom House pioneered several medical developments and technologies, including the introduction of medical physicians to ambulance work, allowing medics to transmit EKGs, using air casts to stabilize injured bones and joints, and even administering Narcan to overdose patients. Unsurprisingly, they got pushback.
You know, when you can take something from nothing and make something out of it, everybody else wants to get in on the play.
At one point, Pittsburgh's mayor at the time, Robert Flaherty, pushed to get Freedom House defunded, discredited, and shut down. He and others considered the services that Freedom House provided to be un-American. Unfortunately, Freedom House was eventually shut down in 1975 after losing much of its funding. As it was phased out, the city launched its own ambulance service that was predominantly white. With more and more questions swarming in my head, I was lucky enough to ask Al Davey some questions on his experience in EMS. So you actually had spent some time in Pittsburgh. Had you ever heard of the Freedom House?
I am learning about it just like everybody else is now. EMS out in Pittsburgh is a third service, meaning there's a police, there's a fire, and there's an EMS. The EMS runs itself, and it was a great program, a beautiful program. I knew about the history of the medicine out there, the history of this Dr. Safer, but for all of that, I didn't know anything about the Freedom House, did not know anything about this Black paramedic coalition that, you know, was probably 5 to 10 years ahead of everywhere else in the state.
What was EMS like back then? Why did you first join?
It was chaos and type A personalities as far as the eye could see. Unlike nursing, which has been around for, you know, hundreds and hundreds of years, paramedics really only came into existence after the Vietnam War and really Korea. So the idea of rapidly evacuating people and IV therapies and advanced things that weren't physicians, when I got in it, AEDs were just coming out, you know, and so there was cardiac care for the BLS provider for the first time. And so it was all very, very new. But there was no science behind it. It was all what the hospital did. They'd give us a couple things to do and we would give it a shot. I wanted to belong. And so as an only child, I thought I didn't have brothers or sisters, so I'm going to be part of something bigger than myself. And so watching it progress over time has been probably the coolest part because we're still figuring it out.
How did Narberth Ambulance first start?
1943, World War II is going on. The wounded soldiers were coming back into Philadelphia's port. And so in 1944, a bunch of people kind of got together, got some really beat up hearses, turned them into patient transport things, and they would go pick up the soldiers down at the Navy Yard. And so that's how Narberth came into being, and then Narberth was one of the first to have paramedics. So it's all been kind of an evolution.
Pope Francis visited Philadelphia in 2015 during his first ever U.S. tour. He stayed at the St. Charles Seminary in Wynwood, Pennsylvania. Maybe not so unsurprisingly, Al had some eye-raising stories on that visit.
Because they had a fire in the building and we almost killed him. The Pope was in St. Charles Borough, Mayo, and the Pope stayed there because he was coming for the city, but this was outside the city. So we were the EMS team for him. This place is old and fired up the elevator. They used it a couple times, then the motor burned out and caught fire, and there was a smoke and fire in the elevator shaft that we almost killed the Pope. It was a blast, and at the end, we got to meet him.
How did you feel when you first witnessed death?
I had witnessed it as a partner, as a driver, as a third. Those didn't bother me because I wasn't ultimately the one making the decisions. I will tell you my first cardiac arrest it was brutal. His name was, I remember this guy's name every day. I'd seen people pass before. I had never been ultimately responsible for it. And when I ultimately was, those are profound moments in my brain. But every time you do this, you make a patient interaction, you either learn something from the patient or you learn what you need to get better at. And so I love that idea of being comfortable in an uncomfortable situation and knowing that it's just knowledge that puts you in the better position to make a better decision. That's EMS. As medicine sometimes is we practice it because we don't ever perfect it. And the goal is to just keep pushing yourself to be a better provider. That's a good system, So I like that part of it. So it came naturally, the social part. The medicine followed quite quickly thereafter because you didn't want to be unprepared.
Have you ever cried on a call?
A movie will make me cry. A death doesn't. I'm not built right, and that's okay. Whether it's the transient nature of life, that this is part of it, but I delivered a kid, and then after that I had like a moment.
Why do you think you cried at that instead of death?
Well, it's kind of like that is going to happen regardless sometimes of what I do. No matter how hard I work, there's just things I can't save what I can't. But a birth is literally something that was, and it was the first one for me. I don't know this lady, and we're about to get really, really intimate. It's an awkward moment, but you're there for a mission and you put that stuff aside. When it was all over and I'm now, me, mom, and the kid are now together, I'm cutting umbilical cords. Like, this is way out of anything I signed up for. And it kind of set me back because it's a natural process that probably doesn't even need me to be there. But the idea is in that moment, it all worked out and the stress upon that. And when it was over, that breakdown afterwards.
Do you have a favorite call you look back on? Something that always makes you laugh.
But Friday nights, Saturday nights, they could be exhausting. Her date of birth was May 5th of 1955. So we called her 5555. When the call came in, it was the Wawa or it was whatever. She'd gotten drunk and started getting disorderly in something. And they would call 911 and the police would be like, we don't want to put her in jail. Can you take her to the hospital and that'll chill her out? I could have the worst night. I'd be down, 7 charts are sitting on my desk. I knew she wasn't sick. And if she was, it was okay too. But those calls they weren't stressful. And she was going to be fine. And we were going to have a funny banter. But for like 3-4 years, I didn't go a weekend without hanging out with 5555.
The pandemic was not easy for any of us, but I can only imagine how it was for EMS providers. What was it like during the height of COVID?
I never saw burnout like I saw in COVID, putting masks on, gearing up, and then having to worry every patient you'd go and you'd be like, oh, I got some blood on me. And you just like wipe it on your pants and you would go back to whatever. But this was respiratory. This was more fearful. And so I think you were on a heightened edge for long, sustained periods of time. We have an employee assistance program. I've never handed out more EAPs, which is basically like, here, I want you to talk to this person. They'll see if you need to talk to an actual therapist. Or do you need a psychologist and you need meds? I never handed out so many as I did in that COVID span. Burnout was real. We were buying rain ponchos because we ran out of gowns. I made a deal. There was a guy who bought 2 motorcycles from Japan and they threw 15, 20 boxes of masks on that pallet with the motorcycles. And then I bought them off him in the driveway because we were out of masks.
What's the hardest part about EMS and how do you stay motivated?
It's the crap that drags you down. The things where you feel like you made a difference empower you. The insanity of this job is also part of its lure. We swim with sharks. So you could swim all day and have nothing happen to you. And then all of a sudden, just one comes out and takes a bite out of you. The calls are the sharks. When I was an EMT and a medic, and my ability to help was I helped one patient at a time. And then as I found administration, I became a lieutenant. Now I helped my platoon. And then I became the deputy chief. Now instead of helping one patient, I help 8 employees. And now I sit here and my span of control of whose life I can impact for the better My effort here supports 140 Narberth people to do their job, which then affects 10,000. What I want to do is just go to a higher arc to affect more people positively. That's what gives me juice.
Yeah.
That you can be anything to anyone, anywhere. And that's pretty impressive. There's not many jobs that allow you that. And the trust that accompanies it. And I'm grateful for this opportunity every day. I'll keep doing this until somebody tells me to stop.
A couple years ago, if you had asked me in high school what I would be doing, there's no chance I would have included being an EMT. But looking back now, I'm incredibly grateful to have that privilege. Speaking to many of my other colleagues off the record, there were numerous and different reasons why people joined EMS, but their answers for why they stayed resembled each other. A strong community of family, the ability to practice medicine, and at the core of EMS, the satisfaction of helping people in need.